All right, we are back again. It must be every other week because that means I got my two compadres here with me, Scott Stevenson, Dr. Scott Stevenson, and my broski Alan Aragon for another episode of the Swollen Trinity. What's going on, guys?
Man. Oh, you're looking more swole than last time, but more shredded.
Still at a conundrum.
I'm just trying to keep up with you for the summer.
There's some dick skin coming through there. I'm seeing.
Yeah,
it'll
happen.
baby.
Yeah,
it'll happen. You're ahead of me right now on the phallic skin scale. So,
right. Oh, the penile dermis skin.
Hey, at least this week you're not in an airport. We'd actually see and hear you normally.
Yeah, don't count those chickens before they hatched. Who knows?
You're not outside. Man, what happened?
He's not outside.
I know.
He has better Wi-Fi.
Yeah. We failed the electrical inspection again here at the house yesterday, so these guys will be back. Don't count on them out yet.
That Florida Wi-Fi, man, it's top notch.
Yeah, I know.
All right, so we're back this week, and our topic, semi-controversial, this one usually. Actually, both of these are. One more in the kind of the mainstream social ideological view of things, and the second one in the fitness realm of things, which we'll get into. They both kind of have one has a kind of a segue into the other. The first one we're going to get into is one that's pretty much raging at some point on a weekly basis right now, and that is the transgender competing in kind of sports discussion that's going on. And what we want to look at more or less today is a lot of the physiological differences, more than just the whole testosterone argument, but kind of what starts to separate males from females at an early age in terms of sports, and look at some graphs, look at some data that's already been collected, looking at those variables, but also just some real world anecdotal stuff that makes sense as to why males shouldn't be competing against females in physical events. So I want to kick this one off to you, Dr. Stevenson, because this is the one you're really well versed in. And we have a particular study that I sent you over to look at that actually documents a lot of the power and strength stuff, the difference between males and females. But like I said, I'm gonna let you kind of take this horse off on your own right now to lead into this discussion as to the whole transgender argument and the males, like essentially males going into female sports and competing against them.
So. It's interesting because we probably should try to define what the controversy is here, and the controversy basically is, as far as I'm seeing it, pits which you might call, I don't mean to use this in a derogatory term, it's just one that conjures up notions, sort of the social justice warriors, those who are wanting equity and equal treatment for all people, size, shape, gender, color, what have you, versus those who are rooted in a physiological basis and reasoning for, in particular in the context of sport, for keeping to rules that separate men and women, which is a gender construct, or males and females, which is a biological construct. So
I'd just like to point out, Alan's drinking out of a measuring cup right now.
That's hardcore. That's how you know.
You did that last time. You're not drinking your own urine, I hope. You're not. There's no measuring going on or like that. Okay.
No.
So your point there, Scott, because I don't want that to be missed, is that there's two kind of different arguments. Like, in other words, what you're saying is like one is the social construct argument, which is kind of an equality for all. In other words, we don't want to exclude anybody or make somebody feel like there's prejudice against them. But at the same time, it's like the whole point for sports for, I don't know, a decades or for centuries or whatever, is to establish that everybody's kind of playing at a even, there's a kind of an even playing field, even though there's really, that's another argument all into itself, because different people clearly have different physiological advantages built in. We could get into all those, but the point is, you want to establish some sort of level playing field that athletes compete against each other in and work from that vantage point. So we're kind of dealing with two different constructs, right?
Yeah. So ideologically, in the overall social structure, you want to give everyone opportunity to pursue whatever path they want to have. You don't want, I mean, that's sort of like the foundation of freedom for all in America, what have you. But sports, in particular, the way at least I understand them, the whole point of constructing a game with rules is to have a fixed set of mandatory things that can and can't be done. For instance, you can't, like when someone's going up to put in a layup, stab them with a knife or punch them in the groin or trip them. Like those things are illegal. So
you can't bite the other boxer's ear off. You're disqualified, right? It's not a part of boxing.
So there's and that's the whole point is when you have that given set of rules, then you know what can and can't be done, and it gives you the confines with which to measure yourself against that other person, and then improve yourself in concert with that person. So they're testing you, you're testing them. You basically are saying, let's go after this, you and me, mano and mano, or woman against woman, or transgender against transgender, or male to female versus male to female, or what have you. We're gonna test one another to make one another better. That's sort of the ideology of one of the root intrinsic values that you get from competing in a game or a sport. I love the meme. People talk about, people trolling on the internet, and they say it's like playing chess against a pigeon. And the pigeon just goes on the board and just knocks all the pieces down.
Right, like stress around, shits on the board, and act like it went anywhere.
Right. Like you didn't play chess. There was no game going on there. So that's obviously an extreme example. So of course we don't want to move ourselves backward in time and start, instituting racial prejudice or any gender prejudice or what have you in the global social sense. But in the terms of games and sport, the whole purpose is to set up those rules so we have a way to test one another. So there we go. I wonder what that was.
I'm trying to get the live feed over to our Facebook. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's all good. So then the question now becomes, and this is what is sort of popping up, and this is just one avenue into this topic, is we have rules of sport that previously basically sort of loosely said, okay, you're obviously a man, or you're obviously male, and you're obviously female. So we know where you're going to go. Like there's really wasn't much question about that. You just you didn't see men trying to get up on the starting platform for the 100-meter butterfly in the women's Olympics or what have you. Like no one was trying to do those things. So now they are, and now we actually have technology where you can actually differentiate physiological differences based on, for instance, like testosterone levels, or we have many more scenarios where literally the medicine, everything from surgeries to hormonal sex change types of procedures, can create this basically.
Wow! Did it happen? Okay.
You're losing me. We have a third category here, gender-wise, in a certain way, but we live in a binomial gender society, at least in large part in the Western world. Now, you go to some place like Samoa, they have a third gender. There are other societies where there are more than two genders. We don't have that typically. It's where we have just men and women. Those are the two genders.
No, we have 57 now. So.
Oh yeah, when you
Brent, well, I don't know how many genders there are anymore. I don't understand.
That's a Jordan Peterson topic, obviously.
Yeah, there's apparently there's 57 or 63 genders now. I don't understand.
Gender fluid as well. I mean, that's an interesting thing too. So, what I think gets confused here then is that no one wants to be politically incorrect because you can lose your job, as we've seen in many cases, run into issues. But in order to maintain the sanctity of sport, the rules have to be somewhat stable. So that's what I think was that. You tell me, Paul, was that which powerlifting organization recently put a mandate down and said they won't be allowing transgender athletes to compete.
Yeah, I can't remember which federation.
USAPL.
I think it was the USAPL. They just said flat out that they won't be allowing transgender females to be competing against women, which I think is great. I think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're going to cover and show how once, and that's a huge part of it, is that I don't think people take into account, is that once boys and girls start hitting puberty, males' athletic ability starts climbing and ascending at an astronomical rate compared to females. And that we
put this figure up, Scott.
Yeah, we actually look at that graph, and you look across. I believe this is jumping. When they're looking at jumping, and what were the
60-meter sprint? I think a jump, a broad jump, and maybe one other.
Right, and what you look at when you look at this graph here, this one's really good. Is that if you look at that, you'll see that for females, once a female hits about 14 or 15 years old, there is a plateau that tends to happen in terms of them improving their performance. So females tend to peak fairly early. And yeah, they do have room for improvement, but the ceiling's very low at that point. There's not a lot of room for growth there. So whereas you see with boys, by the time that they hit 14, they're about to start an ascension. They have a big ceiling from 14 to 18 years old as far as athletic ability. So when you look up until that point, it's pretty close as far as athletic performance and ability between male and female up until those age ranges to about 13 or 14 years old. Boys hit puberty, testosterone comes on full force. You're taking like four or five showers a day. Like you don't want to do the math problems.
I'm still in the plot, right?
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So,
sure.
But there's a massive difference in jump there in performance that is related to the hormonal environment changing pretty dramatically between males and females.
Girls becoming women put on body fat, and there's not much of an increase in muscle mass. Boys will tend to get leaner, and they add muscle mass. So, I mean, obviously that means less, quote unquote, dead weight in terms of fat relative to body mass. Men become larger as well. So it's just simply a size effect, but you still see the same things when you relativize to body mass. Sometimes, at least in terms of like lower body strength, women and men are pretty equal because men tend to distribute more of their muscle mass into the lower body versus the upper body. But yeah, these things are all pretty easy to explain in terms of muscle mass and body composition changes that are brought on. So there's definitely an advantage there that we see physiologically happening in strength and power. And you see the same thing if you look at endurance. Men they're larger, generally speaking. They've got larger hearts. They've got more higher hematocrit and more hemoglobin. Testosterone stimulates erythropoiesis. So these things persist as well, basically across pretty much all sports. And some of it's just absolute size to some degree, but some of it's also just a matter of the body composition changes and the other hormones that advantage in various ways. So that's obvious there, and it's kind of like, this is kind of common sense, but there's a reason why we separated men and women in sport was to basically create some sort of an equitable playing field where those challenges, men versus men, women versus women, made more sense. And like one of the things I think, Paul, you wanted to talk about was this person who took the Williams sisters on in tennis, who and obviously they're like, I mean, they're probably two of the best female tennis players of all time. Just literally,
as far as probably the best women tennis players potentially all time. And it was back in 1998, and they kind of made the claim they could beat any male player ranked outside the top 200. And so Karsten Brash, who was an Australian guy, basically laughed at him and took him on. And Brash was described by one journalist as a man whose training regime centered around a pack of cigarettes and more than a couple of bottles of ice cold lager. That was his training. Regimen. The matches took place in court number 12 in Melbourne Park. After Brash had finished a round of golf and 2 shandies, he had a broken wrist and a badly sprained ankle following a bar brawl. He first took on Serena, and after leading 5-0, beat her 6-1. Venus then walked on the court, and then Brash was victorious again, this time winning 6-2. Brash said afterwards, 500 and above, no chance. And he added that he had played like someone ranked 600th in order to keep the game fun. Now, women or people who, are doing signal virtuing, and who are social justice warriors, they can get mad about this shit all day long if they want to. But the fact is, the guy literally went and got buzzed, had injuries, and still smashed the 2 best female tennis players in the world at that time easily. Okay? That's a massive discrepancy, and it's all gender-based. It's all the difference between being a male and being good at an athletic event and being a female and even being the best in the world. The other one I looked up was Flojo, right? She still holds the record for the 100-meter dash for women and has held it since, I believe, it's like 1988. And it was 10.64. There's high schoolers that would blow the doors off her. High school boys. There's high school boys. There's a white dude that just ran.
By that time when they're 17 or 18, but yeah.
Yeah,
they call it boys, right?
But there was this white guy out of Texas, white kid, first year running the 100, and he ran it, and it was 9. I can't remember. It was 9.92 or 9.96 or something. This is his first year ever running 100 meters. That means if he would have raced FloJo in her prime, he would she just got smoked. This is like a 18-year-old, 17 or 18-year-old kid.
That's like.
And so then I spent some time looking up some numbers. There's tons of high school 100-meter males running faster than 10.64 every year. Tons.
Here's the thing, and there's an example is in the news of you can actually, it's sort of gone semi-viral. I've seen it pop up of a woman, a girl, quote unquote woman. She's a female high school athlete who placed like 8th in her event, a track and field event, and she missed getting an opportunity for a scholarship. Apparently, I don't know the details. And there were 2 male to female transgender athletes in that event. There were
the two males that won, and she had the video where she's. Yeah, it's a pretty heartbreaking video, really, if you watch it when you take into account that it's this girl who's loved track and field her whole life. That's what she's poured all her time and physical and emotional energy into. And so these 2 guys start, saying, hey, we're females, and they allow them to go race. And she said, pretty much when you line up and race, it's going to be the 2 fighting for third.
So here's the thing. Here's the exchange that we're basically making to some degree is we're gonna look at this notion of social equality, which is a phenomenal idea, and I think that should be applied pretty much as universally as we possibly can with common sense in mind. And when we impose that upon sport, where we're having those rules, at least this is my opinion, is vital to the nature of what makes that a valuable institution of society, where we have some form of equitable comparison, men versus women. We're screwing up sport. We're basically violating.
We're absolutely destroying women's sports.
You can fuck it up, like for this poor woman, who lost that potential scholarship, or literally, it'd be like all of a sudden, like in high school football, you let like Nebraska Cornhuskers come and play like in the Nebraska high school championship, like play for that, and they're just going to just destroy people. Or NFL,
it's a good metaphor because it'd be like if you allowed NFL teams to come in and play for the national championship in college.
Yeah,
it's going to be a slaughter. It doesn't matter who they're playing; it's just going to be an absolute slaughter. And then they can say, "Oh, well, we're national champions."
And it's men versus men. I mean, in that case, but it's a different level. So we have all these different divisions and levels, and that's all with something in mind to make make the sport valuable so you can have a good challenge. It's like it's no fun to get just annihilated and get destroyed, especially when you know it's going to happen.
Oh man, did you guys see the Fallon Fox versus, I forgot what it was, but it was a male to female transgender athlete who did a stint of mixed martial arts, and she just there was like,
yeah, she was absolutely I believe that she actually fractured a woman's skull.
Yeah, there was some. That was a really gnarly example of the inequity of the whole thing. And I wanted to mention, guys, you brought up how the USAPL banned transgender individuals from competing, right? So something I didn't know, I just found out just now, was the person who broke like 4 world records or something like that. Her name is Mary Gregory. She got stripped of those titles. I think this must have happened right around the same time the USAPL instituted their their new rule. But they took her titles away. And something I wanted to mention is a little bit of a soapbox moment here, is when she broke those records, everybody piled into her Instagram account and started just hurling insults, just personal shots, and just the terrible crap that keyboard warriors feel they have the right to do online, right? They just pile in and whatnot. But in my opinion, it's not her fault that she's not in the wrong for competing how she wants to compete and break those records. It's really, if people want to start yelling and screaming, talk to the organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree.
So one thing, of course, too, and I sent you guys a paper on this, and this is pretty obvious. They've actually looked at body composition in both, and this was a meta-analysis, actually, I believe. It wasn't a ton of studies, but they kind of lumped them all together, of male to female and female to male. And you see what you'd expect when those changes are made and the hormones are applied to do that is, I think it was weight gain in both cases. And the weight gain is attributable exactly what you'd expect it to. So male to female loses some muscle mass, gains some body fat, and the opposite happens in the other direction. And so you've got a transgender individual who wants to still compete in those chosen athletic endeavors, and they know they're not going to be probably as good as they would have been, especially in the case of a male, whereas a female to male is going to get better. So the male to female now isn't in the powerlifting, let's say, is going to have a limitation upon her performance relative to when she was previously a man, or identified as a man, or at least was, hormonally speaking, still sexually with that in that identity. Let's say the verbiage gets fucking hard as shit.
It does. Dude, I'm not gonna lie. That sometimes I get confused, like trying to figure out which the verbiage, like what I'm talking about.
You know what I'm getting at? So so that person, that's the thing. I can empathize. I can't entirely empathize, but at least I can sympathize with that idea. It's like, so what's that person to do? Like, they really want to compete as a power lifter, and now they're identified as a female, and that's who they are in their mind's eye, and they want to compete somewhere, and there's no place for them to go. Well, that sucks too, right?
Yeah.
And so the organizations that are doing powerlifting, this is a grand opening. I'm like, I haven't seen anyone call for this, but why not create a brand new powerlifting organization that's just for transgender individuals?
Well,
that would be phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, right? Here's the thing about that is, like, one of the things is like the transgender, according to the data, transgenders only make up, I think it's 0.4% of the population, right?
It's still 1.4 million individuals in the U.S. Transgender adults. So there's a bigger pool than you might presume.
No, it is. But I was going to say, out of that pool, though, then you'd have to. So, like, powerlifting is kind of a. It's a niche sport, right? Like, there's like, I competed in it for 10 years, and there's plenty of times you go to majority of people sitting out in the audience are family members, girlfriends, boyfriends, friends, whatever, stuff like that's in the sport. I don't know how many people you would have competing in that particular division within powerlifting. I don't know, like, how much it warrant. Like, I get it, like, if you're transitioning from, say, male to female, and you're like, well, I powerlift and I want to continue powerlifting, and there's in a powerlifting federation says, well, we are not going to allow that, then either you have to look for a federation that does, or you have to wait on a transgender division to be open. I don't know.
I just Special Olympics, and those are set, and we have. I mean, there are various organizations for people with quote unquote physical disabilities. I think really,
somebody's going to take that comment the wrong way. Totally.
What's that? What do we say now?
No, I get what you're saying. Somebody's going to be like that. You're like Scott said they have Special Olympics.
I think it's a great thing. It's phenomenal.
Here's I think where you get into a gray, murky area. One of the things, and if Jamie, our Jamie, will pull up that one meme that talks about the transgender track athlete that went from basically being an incredibly subpar male runner in 2017, 18, or whatever it was, and then transitioned. And then became a female champion just simply by transitioning. When I went through the articles, I believe there's no way they test for. They don't have a limit for testing testosterone in with transgender athletes. And I looked at this several times. So they have to see for a year they were suppressed to a certain degree, but then after that, there's no testing. So
yeah, and see that idea, like it conjures so many things in my head. Obviously, when it comes to using steroids, that's considered cheating, and the technology, the WADA technology.
Okay, so what's the difference though then between say a female that's transitioning to male taking testosterone?
I'm getting there. Yeah. So that notion, socially speaking, of cheating by using steroids or any of the WADA banned substance or what have you, that one, people aren't going to balk at that for the most part. But the idea that you're going to go and test someone and basically sort of, in a way, say, no, you're not who you say you are, or I'm calling your self-identity into question by, I'm going to test you and try to basically, which could be perceived as, I'm negating your identification as being and having this other gender, this new gender that you self-identify with.
I feel like
that's a taboo thing in our society, and that's why we don't do that. Why that test, at least is my thought, is that why that testing hasn't become a black or white thing, because you get shit on if you do that. It's like how dare you tell me who I am with some sort of a blood test. That basically crops up. People just balk at that.
And here's the problem. And I believe a lot of the think tank leaders that kind of oppose this from a social ideological standpoint make this one of the same arguments, and I think it's hard to argue against. And that is, we've reached a point where we literally have to deny biology. Like we have to deny that it exists. I mean, like the people, like I said, I'm trying to deal in the facts here. So like everybody's like, it's not an inflammatory thing, but I'm saying if you have, male chromosomes or female chromosomes and you have a penis or you have a vagina, I thought we settled this in Kindergarten Cop decades ago when the little boy said boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. I mean, I felt like that was pretty clear, but now we reached a point, it's kind of like you're saying, Scott, somebody takes a blood test and says, well, you're a male, and it's like, well, you can't tell me what I am.
Outside the range, right? Yeah.
So now the point I think of most people have had, even the people that the majority of people I see that even oppose transgenders, where it's a transgender female competing against other females that's biologically a male. We don't really care what you do with your life. I don't really care what you do with your private life. I don't care how you live your life in those kinds of ways. But when you're literally taking away opportunities, legitimate opportunities for scholarships, for sports, for all those kind of things from other females, and you've spent 17 or 18 years of your life living as a normal dude, it's incredibly unfair. And to me, it shits on those women. And what I don't get is like if there's this whole thing for equality, where's the feminist outrage about this? Because men are just walking into women's sports and literally walking all over them from a performance standpoint, and there's no outcry from the feminists about equality when it comes to this.
It's fascinating because it's it's like you're going, men who identify as women, then they're walking in and saying, I'm part of your tribe as a woman. And so in a way, they're almost ingratiating themselves to feminists in a certain way. Like, I want to be one of you. And now let me take a dump on your Easter basket
right.
at the same time. And it's like, so what do you do? Like, I think they call this the Benjamin Franklin effect. There's a story about Benjamin Franklin where there was a political opponent to him, and this opponent was speaking poorly about him. And in order to try to stop that, he asked the guy, said, here you have this wonderful library. Do you mind if I borrow this particular book? It's very rare. And he borrowed the book. And the guy's like, oh, wow, like he really appreciates me and he borrowed my book, etc. And that guy stopped speaking poorly about him. So you say, well, I identify as a woman. Like, you can't shit on me because I'm one of you. Like, I am of your tribe. So that's a very discombobulating thing. And it's a novel thing. Centuries ago, you wouldn't have seen that in many societies where someone moves from one to another. But maybe someone out there who knows a bit about Samoa would know about how this. Shell's giving you some shit, but there is a third gender in Samoa where, and I believe this has something to do with the history there of prisoners being there and not having enough women, literally, to fill the roles that would be more traditionally filled by women. And so men who are more
we've done away with that, right? Like anytime you start speaking about gender roles in society these days, you suddenly become a bigot. Yeah. Like you're misogynistic or you're transphobic, or there's got to be a phobia in there. I got to be afraid of something. Either I hate women or I'm afraid of them, or I hate transgenders or I'm afraid of, like, phobias of being afraid of something. Like I'm not really kind of afraid of anything for the most part, except heights. But
you're definitely not afraid of donuts.
I'm not afraid of donuts or cookie pies. I love that shit.
Yeah, I think that people are afraid to talk about this stuff. You know, they're afraid to get yelled at. You know, I think that there are certain personality types or maybe even factions of folks who just will deny an opposing opinion or an opposing perspective. They'll just yell over you. I think that's really kind of a crappy way to push the conversation forward.
Progressives have become, like I was involved in a very short political discussion this morning. That's kind of the difference between like the liberals and progressives. And progressives are the ones that want to shout you down if you say anything that opposes their own ideological principles, right? They want to shout you down, say you can't say that. That's hate speech, or that's inflammatory. That incites violence or whatever it is, when you're just giving a contradictory, or not contradictory, but an opposing opinion to whatever their own personal ideology is that they live by. And that's how we used to have discourse and dialogue, and how we created, constructive thinking for us as individuals, right? Like we didn't all have to agree. The point is that we had discussion to kind of, parry back opposing ideas to make us think, to help us grow. Mm-hmm. And now what it's become is, and I said that this morning, it's not enough anymore to be tolerant of another ideology. We have to celebrate it. Mm-hmm. We can't just say, like, yeah, go ahead and do what you want with your life. I don't care. You're not hurting me, whatever. I can't just do that. That's not okay. I have to celebrate it. I have to make a post saying about how great it is. I have to join in on that. I'm like, well, no, I don't really. I don't have to celebrate, for example, like Gay Pride Month. Like, I have gay friends. I don't care what they do with their life either, but I'm not going to go out to a gay pride parade. Right? I don't like. I'm not.
Well, you're a snack, bro. You're more than a snack. You're like a buffet, bro.
Yeah, you get attacked.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm just not. Like I said, I'm not homophobic. I'm not transphobic, and I'm not a misogynist. I just have views sometimes that run counter to certain either what you call subcultures or ideologies by these people live by, and that's okay. Like I respect theirs, and I want them to respect mine. There's no hate from my side about any of those things. I'm just like, okay. It's just like I think that gender roles are okay. We lived for thousands and thousands of years with kind of the acceptance that men have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and women have certain strengths and certain weaknesses. And there's a complementary factor when we kind of mesh those, like the chocolate and peanut butter. thing. You put it together and it's delicious, right? And that's kind of how we mesh together. You know, even as something as simple as women have better peripheral vision than men. And that's, you know, comes back to, you know, like we know that, right? We look in the cupboard for something, we can't find it, right? Your woman comes over to get like 3 seconds, right? Exactly, right? I don't know why that happens. It's right there in front of you, but you can't see it. But that's a story that we all go through. It's literally a physiological thing. So, like I said, it's not enough, I think, these days that you can just say, dude, go live your life. I'm happy for you as long as you're happy, whatever. That's not enough anymore. It's like we have to actually celebrate it. Like, well, don't ask me to celebrate it. Like that, I'm just not going to. And then if you don't, that's when kind of the shout down comes and they label you one of the terms that they have that kind of try to guilt you into ascribing to kind of their belief system.
I think it's pretty clear that you're not a bigot, but it's easy for folks to jump to conclusions because I think people by nature think in black and white terms, just black and white extremes. So they'll, you know, there's really no shades of gray in between. People can't think in terms of nuances and those, you know, multiple shades of gray. And so, you know, here's a quote by Steve Magnus, I believe is the right way to say his last name. This is from an article that you sent me, Paul. I think this is a great quote. He says, "Sports division of sex is binary. Gender is fluid. Biological sex isn't fluid, but it's not clear cut." So it's, but the key of that is sports division of sex is binary. As far as we have it today is binary. Right. And, you know, you can go all the way back to the question, why do we separate men and women in sports? And it all, in my opinion, it all hinges upon, okay, well, that is discrimination, but it is a necessary form of discrimination in order for the playing field among women to be fair. So it is a touchy issue, and this is something that the solutions to it are really murky. Like I am kind of befuddled as to what are the solutions. I kind of lean towards creating another division. Just create the division.
I wanted to say that, Alan, before you move too far from the binary idea and the fluidity idea, is that we think about weight classes, multiple weight classes. Why don't we just have heavy and light in bodybuilding or powerlifting, what have you? Because we can see there's distinctions among all those weight classes. We could divvy them up like every pound. That would be kind of crazy. But now we're moving, and this is a paradigm shifts are hard for people to have, but this is a paradigm shift, which I think you're getting at, is that there will be the number of transgender individuals is, I don't think the relative percentage is going to go up over time.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense, like make a new federation or make a new division. I mean,
and it'll grow.
Then the other thing about within those divisions, then you could do the hormonal testing where you could set a standard that could be applied across anyone who, you know, is transitioning from whatever they're transitioning to, and say, okay, so if you're transitioning, if you're a transgender woman, you're transitioning from a male to a female, they can say, okay, well, when we test you, these are the parameters that you're going to have to fall within from a hormonal standpoint that we're setting the level playing field for. And that makes things much more clear.
There's also a time function there. So like a lot of the, I forget which one it is, one of the natural bodybuilding organizations says 10 years since any previous steroid use or any of the use of any of their illegal substances, because there's a washout period, so to speak. So, you know, we could take the data that the science might provide us is like, when do you see let's say a male to female transition, some sort of a plateau in terms of body composition? Like, for instance, like you could take, and this is what people do with steroids, is they will use them as long as they possibly can and then drop them out, like use fast acting orals so that they can avoid detection. Like that's a strategy in place.
That's exactly that was how. There's ways to beat. Just because you're beating a drug test doesn't mean you're drug free.
Right.
Just because
they're still there. So like you take someone who's just recently made that change and their body composition hasn't shifted, but you know their testosterone levels are down in minimal.
Or within range, right?
Or within range for a female or what have you. Like that would be something that's like, well, you need to be like 1 year post your transition. We'll document you now, and then, you know, a year later we document you in between, and then you'd qualify for our new division. something like that. Well, then we can call you a transgender athlete according to our parameters. So then we could call you a natural athlete according to our parameters. So those things could all be done. It's like there's precedence for all those types of division setting, natty versus enhanced, or we have weight classes. It's been done in sport for millennia.
That's a really good point. We already do this across sports in a multitude of ways, right? Like we separate things. There's kind of there's discrimination practices that happen, but people like, okay, they're necessary discrimination practices. Mm-hmm. And I don't think this is any different. We don't want somebody who's grown up as a biological male for 18 years to just wake up one day and go, well, I'm a female, go through a year where they do, some sort of transition, then come out and just start blowing the doors off women in their selective sport. That's not fair to those women. That's not fair to those 17 and 18-year-old women who don't have the physiological advantage that person did. I mean, seriously, dude, watching that video, it broke my heart, dude, because I'm like that. You could see the pain and anguish on that girl's face that she spent all her life, working really hard to be the best track athlete she could be. And she's like lining up to knowing she's going to take third. Like that's so incredibly unfair to the young women across the United States. And even in other countries where some of this is going on, where they literally know they just don't have a chance. And the factions that govern these different entities that make these rules that allow this, those are the ones that really should be punched in the fucking face for allowing this bullshit. That's just how I feel, dude. Because you're robbing people, you're robbing these young ladies of legitimate opportunities in life, in order to placate to a social ideology, instead of stepping back and saying, what's fair to everyone here? What is fair? Because it's not fair to those females. It's not fair to those young ladies. Okay. So they're saying, well, let's placate to this 0.4% or less than that. And let's take these other women who have spent their whole life as women and have worked very hard to get to this level, and let's put them at a disadvantage against competition. That's bullshit. That's outright bullshit.
Yeah, and I think with like a transgender division, for example, I think there should be an understanding, sort of a fundamental understanding, that this is a whole new game here, and people are going to try to game the system. But this is your choice. You're entering into an elite level tactical type of game that is of a different nature in terms of hormone manipulation and other variables that are not present in the normal divisions. You go in there knowing this. It's almost like, all right, are you going to compete in the in the NPC or the IFBB, or are you going to compete in some natty comp? It's a different game, and it's got different rules, and it's got different levels of tacticality, if you will. Yeah. And so the athletes going into like, for example, if a transgender league is established, you kind of go in there knowing that there's going to be juggernauts as far as their tactical abilities go. And I think that's just the nature of the beast, and that's really the only way to make things fair is to create a separate division. And of course, you know what? People are going to be mad at that too, mad at that idea. And I think that's totally unfair to women to be mad at that idea. So, it's complicated. It's complicated.
I want to share my favorite story of a paradigm shift. And this one's like pretty much, this is innocuous compared to what we're talking about here. But so when people first started making cycles, this was an alternative to the horse. So saddles on horses obviously have to fit over the torso of the horse, so you can sit on that saddle. So in order to sort of move people that are shaped in that way, so you look at a bike seat, like it's kind of got this sort of banana type shape, and there's the middle part that goes through and does not fit, especially the male anatomy, one bit. It retains that. If it fit human anatomy, you'd have two cups to sit on the glutes, and there actually are seats that are made that way. But we still have bike seats that are made this way that press on the prostate and potentially lower sperm count and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. Why do we have bike seats like that? It's horrible. It's like that's a weird look.
Have you guys looked at the erectile dysfunction research for cycling?
It's crazy. So
it sucks. You're crushing your bone.
The bicycle. You talking about the bicycle seat that pushes up into your tank the whole time you're on it?
It's the whole body of research. I'm sorry. I'm like.
It's a left, but you're making my point. You're helping me make a point. Like that's a leftover paradigm shift from when saddles need to fit horses, so they had to be shaped like that. And now we still haven't gotten rid of that because it's a paradigm thing, and that's like how tough to say. Well, like how about we just stop? Like it's right in our face. Erectile dysfunction, lowered sperm count. It feels awful on your taint.
Why can't we just get like a seat on a bicycle, right? Like just to sit down on it.
Yeah, they have them like with two little like independently moving.
Two little ass cheek cups, right?
But that's just weird. Like, no, don't do that. So that's an easy thing to change. The evidence is right there.
Okay, so I'll give you one that's similar to that, right? Like, so I was watching this documentary years ago on airplane crashes, and they're talking about how the majority of people, when a plane goes down, if it doesn't just explode into a fireball, what happens is because the seats are facing, forwards, that you basically get your legs broken because the seats, when the plane crashes, the seats basically come unhinged. And then everybody gets their legs broken, and that's how you end up dying because the plane's on fire. Your legs are broken, and everybody's smashed on top of each other. So the safest way that you could actually put seats in is how the military does it, and that's if you have a cargo area with seats like that, like in a C-5 airplane. You face the other way, so your back is to the front of the plane, but people would freak out if you put backwards like seats in a plane where you're facing the rear of the plane, even though it doesn't matter. You're not freaking driving. You're not flying the plane. You don't need to face forward. It's safer if you're facing the other way. Yeah. Look, it's a paradigm shift, right? Like where people are so used to facing forward, they would be like, why are we facing this way? Even though it's safer.
Yeah. It's a comfort level.
Right? So we've gotten used to that.
Yeah, you're used to saying like that's a man and that's a woman. And I can there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's a black and white scenario. I don't have to think about it.
You know what's funny is that you bring that up, and this will be a little bit more of a social podcast rather than we're just talking about science stuff. But I like a lot of times I see now somebody asked, it was a famous person a while back, if they would date a transgender woman. He's like, no, I wouldn't. And then they called him transphobic, and I'm like I wouldn't either. Like I would not date like a transgender woman, that's a guy that's transitioned into a female. Like I wouldn't. Like if I knew that, I'd be like, no, I'm not. Like that's and there's nothing wrong with me saying that.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, there's nothing wrong with you saying that, but that doesn't mean you wouldn't get attacked.
For that, but I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit. Like if you have the sausage and the peanuts still attached, you're a dude to me. And even if you get them cut off, to me, like I like real women. Like mine's right there. I like real, like when I say real women, that are born a woman. That's a real woman to me. What are you laughing at? Yeah, you're kind of a real woman. But the point is, it's like I think you guys are probably the same. You guys are probably the same. You probably like women who were born women, right? And what's funny now, here's the weird thing is, if you're gay and you say, as far back as I can remember, I was born gay, and somebody's like, well, did you ever would you date a woman? And you go, no. Well, what's the phobia for that, right? You guys following me here?
Yeah.
So if you're gay, you're like, well, I'm a gay man. I only like men, and you're like, so would you date a guy who used to be a woman? And he's like, no. Nobody would say anything, right?
Yeah. But and I think that there needs to be tolerance for everybody's view on that. Like, so people should be tolerant, Paul, of your view on that. And I
like to date really beautiful women. Like that's what I like.
People should be
preference.
People should be tolerant of your preference. You know what I mean? And if somebody was cool with dating transgenders or dating
I don't care.
The full spectrum, it's got to be tolerant of it.
Totally cool, right? Like I don't care, man. The point is like if all of this stuff is supposed to be private, which was forever, was like, don't infringe on my privacy, how I live my life. I'm like, okay, that's cool, but don't force it upon me either. Don't force me to say like, oh, well, okay, well, I don't want to date transgender women, and say, well, I'm transphobic. Like, no, dude, I probably won't ever date blondes again.
There's an Alan Watts. I wish I could remember the exact quote, but Alan Watts put forth this notion, and I've read, I think, all of his books or listened to them on audiobook, and it's something like there's no bad thoughts, there's only bad actions, really. And we will all have thoughts that come to our head, if we're really being honest, that are not really that kind. Like all sorts of shit comes into your head that can be, but it's what you do with those thoughts and how you act upon them in various ways. And even if you look at, like, I mean, Robert Sapolsky has a beautiful book out called Behave, where he goes through some of the literature showing that if you look at the amygdala, which is part of the emotional brain, it will get lit up in people when they see faces that are very different from the faces they're used to being exposed to in the course of their life. So someone who grew up in a, say, a predominantly black neighborhood and they see a white face, or vice versa, or you could show someone a green face, because green faces are very odd. It will light up the amygdala, which is sort of a fear and aggressive center, and then your prefrontal cortex can calm that down. That's our higher intellectual center. It says, hey, there's nothing to be scared of. Don't worry about this. But you still have that. It's built into our brains to recognize that which is other and different and be cautious about that. That's just a natural, normal thing. You see something on the ground in your peripheral vision, it looks kind of like a snake, and you've been bitten by snakes, you jump, and it's a stick. Well, okay, you're not a bad person for having jumped at that, what you thought was a snake, for a split second. Now, it might be a little bit odd if you go and you pick up that stick and you start wrangling it and break it in half and just bad snake. That's kind of bizarre behavior. And I did that to be facetious and funny, but that would be analogous to like saying, "Oh my God, like you transgender person, I hate you," or whatever. Like, people don't do that, but
nobody does that. I don't even see like the oppression. Like I really don't. Some people say that's relegated to my privilege. I just don't see it. Like it's for example, the Daily Wire just did an article on this the other day and says basically there's a million prides, different pride celebrations this month, but the one you hear about is gay pride, right? Mm. And so people are like companies, like states, everything bend over backwards to celebrate this. So I don't see like this oppression. Somebody's like, well, you didn't see the time somebody said something derogative, to me because I was holding like my boyfriend's hand. I'm like, that's one person, and it's a drop in an ocean of ideologies. You know what I mean? It's like to me, that's not oppression. That's one person's opinion about you. You can't. What's the whole thing about? You got so many seconds in a day. Somebody takes 10 seconds away. You don't throw the rest of the seconds away in the day because of those 10 seconds, right? Yeah. And it's back to the 4 agreements. Stop taking everything personally. Mm. So I feel like it just falls in line with that. I don't see the oppression. As far as like people say, it's kind of like someone say what was it that Trump said that transgenders can't serve in the military, that's a form of oppression. Dude, there's a million reasons they'll discriminate you from going into the military. A million. Like you got poor eyesight, poor hearing, you got club feet or whatever. Back. You got a bad back. You didn't score high enough in the school. Like there's all sorts of discrimination for getting into the military. Mm-hmm. We discriminate against tons of things. Okay, so that's just another one of those things.
One of the things that because you couldn't hear me the last podcast. One of the things that came up when we're talking about eating meat and plants is how versatile. That I wanted to say was how versatile the human species really is. We've been able to kind of populate, be it good or bad, the world from all across the globe, and we've got so many different variations of what it means to really be human. And I think we need to start to get to a point, if we're going to keep from annihilating ourselves as a species, where we celebrate that, and we celebrate.
We got to be more like Captain Kirk. We got to be more like Captain Kirk. He didn't discriminate at all.
Right.
He went from
There's
planet to planet.
Right.
He just went from he had purple ones, green ones, blue ones. And man, wow. All right, go ahead. I decided to put that in. I want to contribute meaningfully.
I like that. But no, you're actually helping me once again make my point is that let's be smart about this. Like we want to accept anyone who decides that they're of another gender, but accept that in a reasonable way. It's like not just let them infiltrate sport, for instance, in a way that destroys the rules and the sanctity of the game. Let's make a new division for them. Like let's not just say, well, you can go wherever you want and wreak havoc in the rules that we've had set up for decades or even centuries. Let's glorify what you're doing in a certain sense, make your own division and make it and just be smart about it. and say, here you are.
I would think that, yeah, I would think that giving them their own division where they could compete against each other on an equal level, and then and like you said, have it be celebrated into all its own. How is that not kind of giving them a better platform to work from?
I have a kind of an experience. So years ago, and this is just, it's kind of, you remind me of it. I was competing in the Mr. Arizona, and made a long story short, there was a guy who ended up winning the show, and he had basically abscess delts and quads, like these huge bumps, and they really did not. When he won, he had this sense that he shouldn't have won, and I could see it in his face because he realized that someone else should have beaten him, and it was like, I was like, fuck, you know. He knew that it wasn't right that he won, and I don't know, this may not be the case, but I can imagine, like, for someone who is a transgender athlete, there may be some situations where they go in and like how about, like, did they interview those two transgender athletes who beat the woman who placed 8th and all the other people? Like, maybe they don't give a shit. Maybe they're just happy to have dominated everyone. But like, I know that if I went in and competed and really had what is pretty much obviously an unfair advantage because I'm just destroying everyone. It's like if I wanted to, like, an elementary school playground and started playing soccer with the kids and just, like, right, you know, ran roughshod over all of them. Like, I wouldn't feel very good about that. I mean, I'm trying to use some humor here, but it doesn't make for a good game. It doesn't make for good sport when you don't have someone challenging you. That's the whole point, the way I see it. So that's what a new division could do. Is like, okay, now I got someone who's going to push me to be better, right, within the confines of what my biology and my physiology allows. And I'm not kicking women's asses or getting my ass kicked by men who have a hormonal, right, advantage, or
that was actually the point I was going to make yes, earlier. So they to me, what I see is that the transgender females kind of fit in this in between range. That's how they should fit, right? So they're not down. This is what we've seen so far from kind of what's been manifesting from this, is that they're usually getting their ass kicked against other males, and then they go and compete against other females, and then they kick the females' asses. So they're kind of falling what I consider like in between that range, right? Like, so they're not
like half natty, to segue into our next topic.
They're half natty, which that'll lead us in there. So they're like half natty, so they're not, they're not like elite level male athletes. They're good enough, but good enough to kind of get their ass kicked by all the other ones. So then they go in, they can dominate the females. I was watching the Hodge twins video. They were addressing the same topic. They were both track and field guys in high school, and they said they sucked. And one of them said some females were making fun of him one day. They were on the track team. And he said, "You get your ass out there and line up and we'll race." And he said, "You blew the doors off all the females." It was like, take that shit. So, yeah, I mean, you're going to see funny. That. One of the ones I saw where it was something like there were 5,000 males that outran one of like the best female time for like track. And I can't remember which section it was. There were 5,000 males in the United States that ran better than like the best female track time. Like it was like a year ago in one of the articles I was looking at. And that's a massive discrepancy. There's no way you can just transition away from that. Like, 'cause in other words, even if you're a subpar male track athlete, good enough to get into a Division II school, you're going to be better than all the females in Division II at track, and possibly even, like I said earlier, the best female track stars in the world. Like. Yeah. Like I said, we see high school guys that could blow the doors off FloJo in her prime. Those discrepancies are so big. There's no way around it. Like, you just can't. And there was that one Congress, I think, because I can't remember if it's a guy in Congress or Senate, I can't remember, but said that with the Equality Act, they were going to be looking at. One of them said this will make sure there's no advantage by the males over. Like, how can you even say that without feeling like you're an insane person? There's not going to be.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you guys this. I haven't looked too far into this. What is the argument against establishing a new division? Like, what are people really leaning on?
I think it's basically an ideological viewpoint. Is that we're supposed to accept that a transgender female is just a female just as much as any other female is a female. That's a lot of females in one sentence. And so it's an ideological principle. It's virtue signaling. It's saying that we have to accept that this person is every bit as much a female as biologically born females are. Yeah. And that's just bullshit. It's just bullshit.
Well, socially speaking, it's a really interesting thing because it's kind of like saying, let's say in male bodybuilding, I keep on pulling back to more concrete examples because they resonate, I think, with people, but we've got the open division in the IFBB, we got the 212. And if let's say they added another weight division, which they talked about doing at some point in time, like they upped the 212 to 220, and then they had made it 3 divisions. In no way, shape, or form, by having those 3 divisions, would they be saying that any of those men competitors are less men than the others. It's not a statement on who you are as a person. It's just a statement on what competitive advantages you have, and you take 2 identical bodybuilders, exact same version, like make it the same person, just morph them into a bigger person. The bigger bodybuilder is going to win the judge's eyes
every time, right?
Just how it is. So that's why we do the different divisions, for that simple reason. So physiologically, biologically, that's where that would go. And it's a matter of separating our mind's eyes. Like, we're not saying that someone's identifying as a woman, that's in any way wrong or incorrect, or we're not negating that. We're just saying that there's reasons why, from a sporting perspective, to make these rules, to make the game better for you. It's like in the NBA, they still have like what do they call that?
Honestly,
the division for the shorter guys.
I think people would be super interested to watch a transgender division, and I would so tune into that, right? To see I find that personally interesting, to say tune in to who's the best transgender athlete, whether it's transgender from male to female or female to male. I would want to see. I find that interesting.
And you know why too is because that would immediately bring up these topics of physiology. And obviously I'm a fan of human physiology. It's so what's going on with this person? Well, so-and-so, their performance has sort of declined over the past 5 years, and they came into the division just 2 years after they made the switch. So what does that mean? Why is that happening? Well, they bring in some PhD sport physiologist who says, well, these are the things that are possibly could be going on. If we could openly talk about the underpinning determinants of performance from a physiological perspective for those different sports, that would be just be off the charts in terms of bringing into my intellectual curiosity.
And that brings us to the, we call it the half natty divisions, which would be the transgender divisions, which is the divisions that all these guys, these natural guys online that are constantly complaining about guys on the sauce that they need to go compete in, which is this segue into our a second part. Because I feel like that we've hit on everything for the most part. I think most people, honestly, in my opinion, with some common sense, says, we don't need to be allowing males to compete against females even after they've gone through reassignment or whatever they've done. I don't feel like it's fair. And I think that when you start looking at the results, when a guy's ranked 390th in the nation in Division II and goes from that to being champion in 1 year, that right there, I get it. It's just one anecdote, but we have pretty much every few weeks or so right now, we're seeing more and more anecdotes. I feel like that we know that from a common sense standpoint that males shouldn't be competing against females. So some of this
will mount. We'll see what happens. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I think eventually this topic, because it has become so visible, I think it'll either reach the Supreme Court at some point, or there'll be a larger governing body that's going to make some type of case that, hey, we've got to separate all this out somehow. At least that's what I hope for everybody, because I think everybody should have equality as far as sports goes, but it has to be real equality. And right now, I don't feel like in these examples it's equality. I don't feel like it's a representation of equality, which is what the whole third wave feminism says that they were fighting for. You got guys coming in and walking all over you, and I just don't see it. It's going to, you know what though? If it does come to a head, the third wave feminists versus the LGBTQ That's going to be an amazing cage match.
That's going to be a power cage.
Yeah.
I think it's important to also point out that in this day and age, with the low barrier of entry to comments and taking personal shots and acting like a big person behind a keyboard, I think that really the only way this conversation can progress online is if people just imagine whoever they're talking to online, the person's right in front of your face. You know, I think that
nobody wants to
get in there. It's ridiculous, man. You experience it like every other day, and I experienced it a lot. Big swell of it recently, and I think that people just need to take a step back and just use that simple rule. If you're going to hurl shots at somebody, then just make sure that however you talk is the exact way that you would talk with the person right in front of your face.
Right in front of your face.
And I think that we can have a conversation about the controversies surrounding transgender athletes. I think we can have a conversation about social justice issues. We can have those conversations as long as everybody just realizes, look, I know it's tempting to act like Godzilla behind the keyboard, but that's no way to push the conversation forward.
Dude, absolutely. And one thing you'll find more often than not is when you go into attack mode into a person, they just tend to double down on their beliefs right there in that moment for the very sake because they feel attacked and they're going to be defensive. So if we want to have open dialogue that's constructive about these issues, people have to put away the words like transphobic, homophobic, any type of phobic, and say, let's discuss what's in the best interest for everyone. Because certainly what we've been seeing is not in the best interest for these young ladies who are trying to create opportunities for themselves in life through athletics. It's not in their best interest, and it's not fair to them. And there should be change that happens where they're not facing these kind of situations where they're like, well, I would have gotten a scholarship coming out of high school to a prestigious university, but I didn't get it because we allowed a dude to beat me or two dudes to beat me.
And they feel like they can't speak up. That's the thing. They're afraid of the mob. There's a certain amount of suppression of speech in that regard, which is my hypothesis on why, certain injustices in this area happen because people are afraid to speak up. Yep. So, that will change eventually. I see new leagues, new divisions coming up. I don't think that's too far off in the future. And I think it'll be really interesting, like you said, see the transgender games. I think that would be
dude, I was so tuned in for that. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It'd be amazing. All right. So let's transition into like our next topic, which is semi-related because it's hormonally related, and I think it's a pretty constant nuance in the lifting world. It's something that I see pretty much it's a discussion I see on the weekly, and it's like I said, it's kind of related, but it's kind of not, and that is we were going to get into. Do natural athletes have to train different than enhanced athletes? Or we could even do the vice versa. Once you go from being natural to being enhanced, are you afforded more or different training modalities that are more, what's the right word? Advantageous to you at that point in your, because this is another type of transition, right? So now we're transitioning from natty into enhanced. So one of the consistent arguments that I come across all the time that drives me nuts is if you have espouse a type of training method or system or modality or whatever it is, somebody's going to ask you, is this okay for natties? That shit drives me fucking insane. That shit drives me insane. Like, well, this is a high rep method. Is it going to be beneficial for natties? Yeah, dude, absolutely. Like, it depends on what kind of training style you're coming out of. Is it going to be a novel stimulus for you that there's going to be adaptation that has to happen from it? It doesn't matter if you're enhanced or natural. If that happens, you will see progress from it. But I don't want to get too far down, bro. So, like, Alan, you were going to touch on this one a little bit from, like, you had some data that you'd sent over. But we don't have any actual, like, we don't have a meta-analysis where you took like 20 groups of natty guys and 20 groups of dudes running like a gram of Tren a week and said, okay, over the course of 12 weeks, like they train the same. Well, the trend
they trend the same.
They trend the same. They train like over the course of so many weeks. Like, okay, so let's get to the crux. Let's get to the crux. Let's get to the crux of the bullshit.
It's like now.
Can you imagine bringing that group in? Like, all right, so here's the control group over here. You motherfuckers, you're gonna get nothing. You guys are gonna do a gram of tren a week.
Well, while Alan's laughing, he's been going for a while. Let's talk about my favorite placebo study, which I've mentioned before, done by Gideon Ariel at the University of Massachusetts, where they took the strength and power athletes there at the college level, and they had a competition. And said, those who make the most gains in these major lifts, core lifts, squat, overhead press, clean, I think they were, you will be entered into our D-ball trial. And they took the winners for that. Those are the ones who've been making good gains. So
now, wait, hold on. This is important. I don't want this to be missed right here because there's an important part about who got selected. The people that got selected, make sure you hit on that. That's really important.
You just cut me off right when I was about to
Shut up, Scott. Now talk.
Am I supposed to shut up or talk? I'm confused now.
Shut up when you're talking to me.
Okay. Okay. Alan, let me tell you about this placebo study. I'm not telling Paul about this. Paul, don't even, go get a drink of water or something.
No, I just wanted to reiterate it because it is a lot of people will hear it and bypass this point, but it actually is really, really important. So I just kind of wanted you to emphasize that a little bit. The people that got selected, go ahead and talk.
Were the ones who had won this initial competition. So the law of diminishing returns would have been applying to them more so than the others even. They had made the most gains over the previous 6 or 8 weeks before they entered into the trial. And then they set up a wonderful way of creating expectancies. They took them to the student health center and they read them the litany of potential side effects that they could expect when they get this D-ball, which was just a sugar pill, just a placebo. And then they gave them that for the next 6 weeks. And their gains on these 3 lifts that they measured went up the rate of gains were 2 to 3-fold what they'd had previously on pure placebo, but it was D-ball. It was mystical, steroidal Dianabol, methandrostenolone. It was the shit. It was the bomb, or so they thought. And basically they responded as if they had gotten something amazing. So that feeds into why you get this question all the time on the weekly that bugs the shit out of you, Paul, is that people think they know, they expect that there's going to be something different about being natural versus enhanced. That's in the mind's eye all the time.
Well, the one that gets repeated has been repeated enough. It's kind of like one of those things, like you repeat a lie enough, it becomes the truth, right?
Yeah.
Is that, well, once you get on steroids, it's like you recover 10 times faster, so you can just do all this work, and that's not really that's not really what's kind of going on there. And you and I kind of had a sidebar discussion about this, is that you go from being natural. When I think about recovery, to me, there's localized muscle recovery, and then there's when you train and there's mechanical tension, or there's muscle damage that happens. It's the micro trauma that happens at the cellular level that has to be repaired. So there's recovery at the muscular level. I don't really give a shit so much about that. That's pretty much, within, you can go in and do a light day afterwards, get some, flush out some of the inflammation that occurs from the immune system response, get some blood going back through, and kind of speed up the recovery process from a localized muscle level. When I think about recovery, I think about systemic recovery, and that's whether we need to allow part of the autonomic nervous system to kind of get back to homeostasis, because the sympathetic nervous system has been turned on, been amped up, and you've had the kind of the rush of adrenaline, cortisol, and all that kind of stuff that comes with that. And then, part of recovery from a systemic standpoint is allowing the parasympathetic nervous system to come back up, return to baseline, so you can go back in and train hard again after that. And there's nothing from an androgen standpoint that is going to change those parameters systemically. Now, there's also
couple
systemically
things, but I'll throw in there. But I don't want to stop your.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, one of those that just kind of occurred to me, I don't think I mentioned this before, is the effect of androgens on the cortisol receptor in terms of blocking that. And one of the things that you'll see is that the extent to which, obviously, cortisol has been used as a marker of overtraining. And so a reduced testosterone to cortisol ratio or an elevated cortisol to testosterone ratio is, at least in the endurance exercise literature, the resistance exercise literature is just, there's paucity. There's hardly anything there. It's like almost not even worth mentioning. It's kind of piss poor, unfortunately. But there's something to say there potentially with blocking the impact that cortisol could have with androgens. And that seems to play a role. That's one of the mechanisms I think that's involved with why using like an intra-workout drink with carbohydrate in it, which will reduce cortisol release, may have an impact on growth over the long haul, is that you're preventing cortisol elevation. And cortisol, being a steroidal hormone, just like the androgens are, is long-acting. So its effects will persist long after a workout for hours as it's doing its genomic work on potentially increasing muscle protein breakdown and blah, blah, blah. So there's one thing that's there, and I have another big thought that covers everything, but I wanted to interject. That's one mechanism that I don't think I mentioned before, but it's something that's in there, but it still is trumped by my other big thought, which I can interject now or I'll...
No, go ahead.
So, yeah, so the thing that's interesting is that and we know this is the case, we talked about the Boson study from WashU, which we can throw the graphic up whenever. That's the best study we have, really looking at the introduction of, in this case, testosterone at 600 milligrams per week, amplifying gains in strength and muscle size, basically doubling them over training alone or doubling them over just the gear alone. When you add training with the gear, you basically double your gains there. What you see and what will happen, you can compare strength in someone who was natural and became enhanced, or look at natural organizations versus enhanced organizations, is that you're training with a heavier weights. You're doing more in the gym simply by virtue of being stronger and stretching your body to a larger extent. So if you've got a natural guy who's squatting 315 and you've got an enhanced guy who's squatting 585, and that basically that's their relative strength levels. The natural, there's not going to be much of a difference in terms of sets and reps and volume, except the natural guy is going to be stronger, and he's stronger by virtue of the enhanced guy is going to be stronger, and he's stronger by virtue of being enhanced. So relatively speaking, it's not that now he's like be able to do a whole bunch more, except the fact that he's just performing and creating greater inroads to recovery. The way that I describe, pretty much even, and it moves up in parallel. But it's not like there's like some divergence that happens per se. So that's the way that I describe that is that once you get on, androgens basically make you more training sensitive. So like you're that way, yeah. That's how I describe it. Is it make you more training sensitive? So it's like you said, you take two guys, one guy they're both natural, all things being equal. One guy stays natural, one guy gets on. They don't change their training. They say they're training 3 days a week, 3 sets per movement, whatever. And over the course of those weeks, the guy that's on, he's going to grow exponentially faster than the guy who stays natural. But if anything, now it just kind of hit me, the study where they were looking at 600 milligrams of test a week, where the group that didn't even train grew more muscle than the natural group that was actually training. About the same. Yeah.
Okay, right.
What are you talking about, man? Anything 600 grams a week or less is natural. What are you talking about?
That's a TRT does for a lot of guys these days. But if you think about that, they don't even have a stimulus that they had adaptation to. They grew because of the hormones.
That was a stimulus.
Right. So do you see what I'm getting at, though? Is like they didn't grow because they suddenly had the ability to recover so much better. They grew because of the increase in hormones and basically the gene expression that also happens with growing associated with bringing in androgens. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think this perception that you've got greater recovery ability, enhanced versus natural, was imagine this scenario, and it's kind of ludicrous, but I think this is something that may be like subconscious in the back of people's minds. let's say you've got the two twins, one's natural, one's enhanced. The enhanced guy is a 405 bencher. The natural guy is a 315 bencher. And they're going to go, and they're twins. They haven't seen each other for a while. They're going to get together, identical twins. They're going to train. And just for shits and grins, they're going to do the exact same thing in the gym. So for the natty twin, that's a ball-busting workout that, he needs to recover, as many days as he normally would, or maybe more, because that was a killer. For his enhanced twin, that was a walk in the park. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that the enhanced twin has better recovery abilities relative to his performance capacity.
Right.
He just is bigger and stronger because he's enhanced. If he trained relatively just as hard, given what he could do in the gym, his recovery would be on par with his natty twin. But obviously he could smoke his natty twin. So if they do the same thing in the gym, it's nothing for him. There's no inroads to his recovery. So it makes it seem like his recovery is better.
I didn't notice when I went from being natural to when I went over when I started using and ventured into the dark side. I didn't notice all this stuff that people talk about, that natties talk about, that have never used. I didn't notice this, that I could train suddenly 6 days a week and with this enormous amount of volume and recover. I still trained exactly the same way I trained all the 20 years before that. It's just that the results from the training, the adaptation that I saw from that stimulus, it was so much higher, right?
Yeah. And you know what? This is how we know that Greg O'Gallagher is natty. Because, look, I like Greg. I talked to him. I've known him for many, many years. He's been a subscriber to my research review since like freaking 2008 or 2010. So he's a cool guy. I mean, he comes off as a douche, and people hate him for his flamboyance. They just hate him for his vibe and stuff. But I really like Greg. Now, this is how we know that he's natty, because he is under the impression that training changes drastically between natties and enhanced guys. And in response to that, I would say, okay, just even look at beginners versus trained athletes, and this speaks to both your points here. The beginner training paradigm, 3 times a week, full body, tends to increase strength the greatest in beginners. And then you look at, what works with trained athletes. It appears that 2 times a week or so works better for strength gains and even size gains per the later research. In trained athletes, 2 times a week works better. And, why is this? And the most logical answer to that is just the sheer tonnage the more advanced and trained guys are pushing around. Mm-hmm. So it's not like tissue integrity automatically increases. Tissue integrity and recovery ability automatically increases alongside the sheer greater tonnage that they can push around. So, in fact, they actually need more recovery time than the beginner guys, because the beginner guys are not pushing around a whole lot of weight. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, all right, let's look at the enhanced guys. They're pushing around double and triple and quadruple what the natty guys are pushing around. So really, from a relative standpoint.
So then here's my question then. Why do the majority of really large enhanced guys train a muscle group once a week and train on an average of maybe 4 or 5 times a week? Why wouldn't they be twice as big as their own like massive cells if they just started training twice a day, every single day?
Exactly, because they can't. Because tissue integrity doesn't increase alongside.
You can't. And then the other thing is, okay, so here's my other one.
Question, Paul. I have a long-winded one though, but
okay, get it.
Okay, so if they took that volume of training and maybe spread it out, they could do that. But those guys who are the biggest and most massive, we're talking about IFBB pros, who are at the top of the food chain, so to speak, they were probably responders.
Yep.
And when you look at the responder literature, you see things like increased satellite cell density, increased expression and release of growth factors that turn on the satellite cell cycle. Mm-hmm. And there's very little literature on this.
Well, that's what I was getting at earlier. So there's certain genes that get turned on that create the expression for growth.
Well, satellite cell. I mean, with some there's some minor examples, but basically an increase in satellite cell number or a maintenance of this myonuclear domain, number of satellite cells relative to the volume of a muscle cell, is something that's maintained as muscle cells get larger. So you have to have the satellite cell proliferation and differentiation and an increase in nuclei in the sum total in order to have bigger muscle cells. That's something that the advanced responders and the researchers available out there seem to be set up for. They tend to have more satellite cells density-wise, and the signals in terms of local growth factors and cytokines is enhanced in those guys. Now, what I've been able to find, and this is just like it was a muscle damage study, is that that growth factor release and what's going on when you look at like PAX7 expression, which is a marker of satellite cell activity, is that that's something that lasts about 5 or 6 days in duration. So I kind of think of it as like if you have a balloon that you hit, it kind of goes up, and when that balloon is up, it's kind of like the elevation, the signal for turning on the satellite cells and propelling muscle growth. That's something that someone who's a responder to those big monsters do in spades. Mm-hmm. So they get a nice elevation and a signal for turning on muscle growth that lasts, as best I can find in the data, 5 or 6 days. That's allows for about a week's worth of good progression, as long as the food and everything else is in place. Whereas if you're not a very good responder, you may have an elevation there that's kind of the balloon goes up, but not high enough to really do much. So that's elevated again. You train again a couple of days later and keep it elevated so it stays. So frequency may be something that behooves those who are not great responders. But if you got plenty of satellite cell stimulus in place and it's going to last for a week because you're an extreme responder, then you could train once every week. And those guys, they do anyway. Like, that's what they do, and they grow. So why change what's working? So there's a social, like, phenomenological thing. They training once a week works. Why change it? And there's probably, I think, this biological growth factor satellite cell related phenomenon, which probably underlies why they grow so well and why they can get away without training with such high frequency.
I think what I'm getting back to, though, is like what's kind of overstated. I'm not saying it's not true. Is like once you get on, there's things at the cellular level and even systemically that do allow for better recovery. What I'm saying is that that's not really the prime mechanism behind why guys grow once they get on. It's more what you're talking about, whether it's your androgen receptors, how many you have, how well they respond to whatever it is you're taking, and then all the other factors that come with that as well. But it's not just like all of a sudden you get on and the reason why you're growing is because of recovery.
Yeah,
it's other factors.
There's some cool things, and this is in that talk that the why you're an asshole talk.
Yeah,
that's a facetious, like, not why you're an asshole. Why you don't look like a pro?
Why you don't look like a pro? Yeah,
factors and like things like the number of glutamine repeats, CAG repeats you have in your androgen receptor gene. Determines the sensitivity of the androgen receptor to androgens. And they've studied that in the context of prostate cancer and actually looking at quote-unquote racial differences where people identify as black or white. Blacks or African Americans have a higher risk for prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. And that some of that is because, more than likely, they have a greater sensitivity in the androgen receptor to those androgens, which bring upon the prostate cancer. And there's also a particular gene, it's a phosphodiesterase 7B, people can look that up, which will determine the area under the curve for esterified, like a nandrolone or a testosterone enanthate. The area under curve you get from an injection. So it's a 60% difference. So one guy does a 200 milligram testosterone shot, and his buddy who's got the right gene for metabolizing that, he gets 60% more area under the curve from that same 200 milligrams. So that becomes 300 for him.
Yeah, that's something I've tried to express to guys for years now, is that most of the guys you see at the very top of the heap of bodybuilding, the most massive guys, you can't look at a guy at his size to determine if he's taking a lot of drugs or not. Like, that's his you can't. Like, Kevin Levrone talked about this, since he retired. He was massive. Like, Kevin Levrone was freaking massive, and his cycles were really, they were nothing. And Dorian was talked about the same thing. Dorian said he was using 1,000, it was like a gram of tests a week. I think he liked Deca of all things. I think he was using it was 500 milligrams of Deca with some D-ball, like 50 milligrams a day. And he was one of the biggest bodybuilders to ever live. And people will go, well, that's bullshit. He's lying, this or that, whatever. But Dorian said a million times, he seemed like a pretty straight shooter, just the way that he is with his life. I don't believe he had any reason to lie. And there was multiple guys on that panel that talked about the same thing. But all those guys were big pros. And they responded so easily to the drugs they took. Now, that doesn't mean there's some guys, Nasser is dead now. And Dante was pretty open with the fact he knew Nasser. And Nasser would wake up and he woke up, I think every day was a 3 cc shot of testcipinate or ananthate, which is 750 milligrams every single morning.
Right.
So, but he's dead now. So it varies. Andreas Munzer, Mohammed bin Aziz, those guys all use massive amounts of drugs. But on the flip side, there's tons of guys who really don't use a whole lot and grow like crazy from very small doses.
How many times have you heard this story? This is my favorite, and there's so many variations of this. Is 2 or 3 guys are just starting off and they get hooked up with a dealer and they get a bottle of Winnie or D-ball or whatever, and they split it 3 ways. That's all they can afford. And one guy grows like a motherfucker, and the other guys, he gains 15 pounds. The other guys gain 3 or 4. And they're like, how come you gave me the bunk shit? It's it's from the same bottle.
Right.
Do you guys remember Franco Santoriello? You guys remember?
Yeah,
the Cybergenics.
The Cybergenics kid. He's got a new video. If you do a YouTube search on Franco's latest interview, he's, I don't know how old he is right now. He's in his late 40s or I don't know, late 40s maybe.
On Facebook.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, me too. And he partied like it was 1999, between shows. And he describes this one instance where I think he won the nationals or the teen nationals. No, he won the teen nationals. Then he was going to go up to the nationals or something to that effect. And he had an intention of taking 8 weeks off post contest. And that 8 weeks turned into a crazy inordinate amount of time off. And then he got with, I forgot who his trainer was at the time, but they whipped him up into shape I think inside of 2 months. And then he beat the whole field. And he was very open about his drug use. He described his recreational drug use. It was just through the freaking roof, man. This guy would clean out insane amount, like Charlie Sheen levels of recreational drugs. And he's another guy who specifically said, I took so much less anabolics than everybody I talked to. I just took a minimal amount and I just responded like crazy. And he really thought that if he applied himself, he could maybe have taken it all. He maybe could have been Mr. Olympia. You never know. With the way that some people respond and their genetic gifts, it's just mind blowing.
Was that an RX Muscle interview that he did? I think I may have found it.
Was it
Dave Palumbo?
With Dave Palumbo, yeah. It's a great interview. The guy's such a character.
And that's the thing. Here's the thing: is when you engage with guys who have always been natural in these talks, and they never ventured over and stayed on for a significant period of time. Anytime you talk to guys that have been on, that's why Scott will come back and tell you the same thing that I'm saying. It's once you go from being natty to being on, the training that worked for you as a natural is the best kind of training that's going to work for you once you get enhanced, more times than not. I don't know from pretty much all the guys I've ever spoke to that training when they went from being natural to enhanced changed very much. And that's why people's the best training for natural guys. I'm there's no, the whole, well, you got to stimulate muscle protein synthesis more often. The 20 years that I was natural, I pretty much trained on bro splits. I trained a muscle group once a week. And then I was training maybe 4 days a week, sometimes 5, sometimes 3. But I didn't train what I call a lot of these guys, like these natural guys who train them. Look, if you train on a bro split 5 years, really hard, it tells you 4 days a week, there's probably not going to be any difference in your development as a natural guy as if you're training 6 days a week, hitting a muscle group 2 or 3 times a week. There comes a point where you're right pushed up against what your body's going to be capable of naturally, and that's over the course of 5 to 7 years. You're going to end up there is if you're training really hard, regardless of how many days a week you're training or how many times a week you're doing a body part or any of that kind of stuff. If you're training a bro split 4 days a week and you're a natural guy, 5, 6, 7 years, you're going to be pretty much in the same spot as if you were training 6 days a week, hitting a body part 2 or 3 times a week. Otherwise we'd see natural guys that were as big as guys who were using anabolics, and we don't.
Mm-hmm. There's a plateauing off that happens there.
Yeah.
Of course. And it's funny if you look at, like, the NFL is a great example because there's big guys that are there. And, those guys, they're reaching their peak, like the linemen and the big dudes, they're reaching their peak size and weight. They may get better as a player, but those are more minute things when they're in their early 20s. They started playing when they're kids, and there's probably a growth and development effect going on there. But it's not like they're just growing and growing and growing.
By the time that a guy is drafted, say he's 22 or 23 years old, he's as big as he gets for his playing career.
Pretty much.
More times than not.
Yeah.
Even as linemen, right? They'll come in if they're 6'6" to 315 or 320 pounds. That's pretty much where they end up playing at for the rest of their career.
And we look at guys like Jay Cutler, for instance, or Sean Ray.
Right.
Those guys were pretty much as good as they got. By
the time that they were 22, 23 years old.
Yeah, they were 95% of what their full-blown pro potential was in their early 20s.
And here's the other thing I'll tell you, like a lot of natural guys don't understand, is that if you are really going to be the genetic cream of the crop, your ass is going to know 6 months into your training. Yep, you are going to know that you don't need drugs, whatever. 6 months into training, if you are going to be that elite guy, 6 months in, 8 months in, you're going to be one of the most developed guys in the gym.
Kevin LeBron,
and that probably means that you're going to have great. You're going to respond really well to drugs too.
Did you hear about Kevin LeBron's stories of his first competitions where he just, like, somebody said, "Hey Kevin, you gotta check out, walk into this contest next week," and he never competed before, and he freaking just shaved himself down and stepped into the contest and like won it or some crazy stuff like that. It's like, wow.
For elite level guys who are really in possession of those elite level genetics for muscle building and staying lean and all that kind of stuff, it's just evident very early on. And so for the guys who are slaving for years and years and years on end and think that there's some type of secret magical routine workout formula, dude, there's not. Like, you're going to know early on. You're going to do a couple of barbell curls, and you might squat once a month, and you end up with these giant wheels. And that's why the guys is like, you get these guys that are struggling. Like, why am I not as big as so and so? Because he only squats once a month. I'm like, you are not him. Stop trying to.
Right.
Yeah, that guy.
Pick the wrong parents.
Yeah. Get his parents to have sex again, and somehow you just take shape of that body or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But the whole argument about natty guys needing to train differently than enhanced guys, Scott, you and I both know anecdotally because we've had a multitude of clients, and we've had this conversation on the side. I've got clients that were enhanced that really couldn't recover for more than 3 hard training sessions a week. And then I've had natural guys that could train their nuts off almost every day, and I've had vice versa. I've had all variances of this. I don't notice the difference between something that happens between a guy that's natural or a guy that's enhanced as far as I got to manipulate training. And so when a guy tells me he's enhanced, I'm like, oh, I can have you train a whole bunch or very little, or a guy that's natural, well, I need to train you a whole bunch very little. It all depends on goals and then how well that guy can recover. And everybody's recoverability is different. Like, drugs are not drugs. Everybody has a recoverability to the training stimulus that's going to be different. So you have to manage those factors. I don't think you can blanket statement this and say, well, you're a natural guy, train 6 days a week, so you can elevate muscle protein synthesis more often. It's more complicated than that.
I've got the 3 volume tiers of fortitude training, and that makes it so black and white to see because I know who's doing what and what volume tier they're able to recover from and what they're able to do. And I've had guys like pro-level physiques who train like madmen, and they could train on volume tier 1 was all they could handle, and their blasts were short because of that. And then guys who were natural who could train on volume tier 3, which is it's not exactly 3 times the volume, but it's much more. that volume tier 1 guy who was enhanced, he would have been about 2 workouts, and then that would have been it.
Right.
That would have been.
Yeah. So my point about that is then it's not you get on and all of a sudden everybody experiences this magical like recoverability where you can just train your ass off with this high amount of volume and then you're good to go by the next day. That just doesn't happen with everybody.
Right.
Maybe it happens with some people. It doesn't happen with everybody.
Yeah. The thing I have seen, and of course I've got clients like in the UK, steroid use is totally legal. So, and I've got a lot of UK clients actually. I'm better known over there probably than in the States. And I've had clients who had a period where they were off or on TRT, and then they will start up with fortitude training. And it's almost like I've got it set up so that if someone goes about 6 weeks blasting before they have to auto-regulate themselves down to what I call an intensive cruise and take a basically deload, then that's really fucking good. Like they've really micromanaged their recovery and their rest and sleep, everything pretty well. If they go beyond 6 weeks, it's either something substantial has changed. Like literally, either they were eating like absolute dog shit and their sleep was terrible, and then they just totally flip up things around and they bump their calories up substantially and they completely dedicate everything in their lives, or they were off and they went on, and then they will extend that blast. I've seen people go like 10 or 11, 12 weeks. And when they really truly could go that long before they really needed the deload in of itself. But then after that, that's just kind of a one-time deal. And that's just because, they're more sensitive to training and they get that. That's like a kind of like that honeymoon, that happens. And these are guys that of course they're expecting that too. So there is a placebo effect because they've previously been on. So they know they're expecting to feel different and to see things being different.
Right.
But
here's the other thing about that is you take a guy that's in the last 3 or 4 weeks pre-contest, right, getting ready for a show where he's got the most amount of androgens coming in, whereas if you were going by what all these natural guys say, he should be able to recover and train at this really high level, but you're not. Like you're just kind of surviving at that point because of the low amount of energy that's coming in, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just nothing like the myths that get perpetuated by a lot of the lifetime natural guys online. It's nothing like that. And you can't convince them of that because they don't have context. They have no context personally with it.
I have a question for you guys. This is something that is kind of on topic. But I have a friend named Mark Lobliner, and really cool guy, hilarious dude, good guy. There's this whole discussion about fake natties, being against them or not. And he recently did a video where he likes controversy and he likes entertainment. So he's like, I am pro fake natty.
I'm sure that went over well.
and his philosophy is that because of new legal changes and stuff, people could get in serious trouble for admitting use, And so he put out this, I guess this, I don't know how much of it is entertainment, how much of it he really believes, but I think most of it he really does believe that people who are fake natties and claiming to be natty but are almost a lot of cases obviously not, he thinks that it would be the stupidest thing possible to admit that they're on just for the sake of being honest and transparent. He thinks that weighing the compromise of putting your freedom in jeopardy by possibly landing yourself in jail is just not worth ever admitting use.
Alan, I was thinking about this because we talked about that last week on the preliminary. I think there's another factor with that too, though. I think the other factor is it creates constant debate about this person. Think about it. Think of a guy. I don't have to toss out names, but if you think of a guy who's really big and massive and jacked and strong and cut and looks like he's on, but claims like he's like totally natural, like that creates a lot of discussion about a person. So if a guy was, dude, like why wouldn't it? Like why wouldn't you run around and say, yeah, I'm totally natural, and I'm like 275 pounds and single digit body fat, and I'm epically strong and yeah, I'm lifetime natural. And so then I like to go to, read comments, and it's just like, well, people, and here's the thing, at the same time, it's a good discussion, because what if there are guys that are really like incredible outliers that had generally like can exceed what, you would be expected out of a normal person.
Sure. And they exist in the animal world, so why wouldn't they exist in humans?
Okay. Right. And then so it creates a lot of discussion for that person, for their brand. And I'm not saying it's that every guy that's like super, like, I don't play into that. Like, I don't care what a guy, I've never cared if a guy used. It's never interested me. When I was growing up through the 90s, coming up through then, you knew every guy in the magazines was on was on shit. I didn't care. I trained the way they trained. I ate the way they trained and did all their stuff. Wasn't on anything. But I just didn't care. Like, it just didn't envelop my mind like the way a guy does these guys now who are like, well, people need to be honest about like the supplements they're taking. I pretty much, even the geared guys I know use good supplements like fish oil and creatine and stuff like that. I mean, so a lot of the natural guys, like you, Scott, that. I mean, there's lots of guys that are on gear that still take advantage of good supplementation. So, and then the natural guys are like, well, you need to tell us what you're on. No, they don't owe you that. I don't know why natural guys feel they're so entitled to a guy's cycle. Like, where the hell does that shit come from?
Well, it's what is going on, I think, psychologically, we have talked about this, Paul, I think, is that if someone claims that they're doing this on equal footing with you as a natural person, and they're that much better than you, then that sort of de facto means that you're inferior to them. And you don't like that. It's not a good feeling. So like own up to it. Like, you're doing something I'm not doing. So then they can reframe those things. And that's
like the only reason why you're better at me is because you're taking shit I'm not taking.
Right. That's kind of what's going on, I think, in people's minds. And if so that's why people want to know, so they can delineate. And it goes back to where we started this conversation, is that there's an unfair advantage, and that you should be doing something totally different, and you can get away with totally different things than you could otherwise if you're geared versus if you're natural.
And my advice to natural guys that wonder this shit is that I've never I don't know how many clients I've trained over the years. Scott, you can vouch for this too. Is that pretty much all the principles that work for quote unquote guys on the juice work for natural guys too. Mm-hmm. It all comes back to whether you're using, progressive overload works for natural guys, metabolic stress works for natural guys, bro splits work for natural guys, hitting a muscle group 2 or 3 times a week works for natural guys. All of it works for natural guys. It's just that when you get on, whatever results that you were seeing from training as a natural, they just become more enhanced as you are enhanced. Mm-hmm. But there's no, I guess to me, there's just no massive differentiation. You've got to figure out, one thing I'll tell guys is that don't get on too early, because all the stuff that you learn that works really well for you when you're just working with your natural physiological environment, all that shit's going to work well for you when you get on, but just better. So you don't need, what you need to do is spend enough time being natural to figure out what works really well for you, because those lessons, they're the same lessons you're going to need when you get on. Mm-hmm. And that's what natural guys really need to understand, is make the most of your whatever you're given physiologically. Learn how to train, learn how to eat, and how to get lean, how to grow with what you're given. Because when you get on, all that stuff works. It just works a little better. But I don't believe that the whole, well, you got to train different because your recovery is better. It's just that you're better overall.
Yeah. Here's something to your question from what Mark had said, Alan, because it's a really important point, is that, and we do this. This is how literally it's like a central point of how things are marketed in the bodybuilding world, is you take the biggest, baddest, best looking physique athletes and you put them at the front helm of your product. And the presumption is, the underlying presumption is, it's not their genetics. That I don't know, and it's particularly that this product is the best product ever. That is what
Scott,
people are kind of presuming.
Repeat that last sentence. You cut out for that last sentence.
the presumption when you look at those athletes who are the reps is that they look the way that they do because of them knowing something that the people who are buying those products don't know, particularly that those products have some special effects. Those are the ones to go with, what have you. And to a large extent, you know this, like as we talked about, genetics drives the ultimate size you can get to. And, of course, the gear does too. So I'm kind of combining the two thoughts, like what you said, Paul, is that you can become a much larger person and not knowing what the fuck you're doing if you use a lot of gear and you've got, of course, if you've got great genetics and you're responsive to the gear. So that clouds the picture. People want to be able to listen to what those best physiques have to say and hope that there's some information that can be gleaned from them when there may not be. The information may be, I just got this way because I was born with good genetics and I used a lot of shit. So that's why people want to own up to that. So I can know whether to discard your information or not. And if someone then comes out and says, you know, hey, I'm enhanced. Well, one, of course, they're admitting that they're doing something illegal, which isn't the brightest idea. You know, I've had guys, I get asked questions weird questions in the gym. I had one guy asked me once, it didn't faze him to, it didn't surprise me, I guess, that he didn't get this, but he came up to me. I was literally like, I had my headphones on and I was just about to start a set. I was like, and he comes and he stands right in front of me to where I was going to hit him with the machine if I didn't stop, and took my headphones off and I said, what's going on? He's like, can I take D-ball and Winstrol at the same time? And I stopped and I said, hold on, I got a question for you first. Can you shoot heroin and cocaine at the same time? Because I have both of those illegal drugs out in my car, and I was going to do that afterwards. And he didn't get the connection that he's asking me about illegal stuff in the open gym where everyone can hear. He just didn't make that connection. So some people don't realize that when they're asking about the legality types of things. They just don't get that, like, you're admitting to that. But it also shoots them in the foot in terms of the validity of their opinions. It's like, you know why I look the way I look? It's not because I know something, because I've tinkered with my body and I've figured things out over the course of many years. That's made me an incredible athlete. It's because, well, I just use a lot of shit. Like if you say, like, I'm,
and that's true, dude. That's true with some guys, man. There's guys in powerlifting that just jumped up over the course of like a year or two from being nobodies to hitting world record totals, and it really all came back to the amount they were willing to take. And they can not like that or whatever, because some guys are like, you don't know how hard I work. I'm not diminishing how hard you worked. I'm saying you wouldn't have hit those totals without the amount of drugs you were taking. Don't fool yourself about that. I mean, like, there are guys, there are a lot of guys. I'm not saying every guy, clearly. And that's the problem. We don't want to use absolutes here. Is I'm saying there are guys I know, like, the only reason why they got certain totals that they got was because they were willing to take a metric butt ton of shit. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's it.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, obviously stigma there. There's also guys who know the ins and outs of pharmacology, of the various things they're using, and training and nutrition, who put all the pieces together. But of course, there's a legal issue of admitting you're doing illegal things. But but many people would discount your opinions because they'll say you're hashtag all drugs.
Like, so, I get that. Like I said, I was 252 to 256 pounds, totally natural after 20 years, and I trained my ass off to get there. And I learned how to eat to grow. And but then people look at me and say, "Now, well, you only look like that because of drugs." I'm like, dude, that has nothing to do with how I look now. If I came completely off, I have pretty much for the most part used a replacement dose. And so, I mean, I'm really just working with what my body should be making normally. And so it really has nothing to do with drug use anymore. Like, I know how to train. I know how to eat properly. And that there's so much into that. I mean, there's so much. And yeah, you can get away with some stupid bullshit when you're taking a lot more drugs. But the problem is, I think most guys who are natural, they don't understand. It's not one simple factor of just being able to recover so much faster from doing more work. There's a multitude of other processes physiologically that are going on there.
Yeah.
And I know we're pushing the time limits here, but I wanted to bring up Doug Miller. So Doug Miller he's known as he's known as the GOAT of the natties. And
Machine.
you know, if you really want to make a bunch of enemies in the natty witch hunt crowd, offer your opinion that you think Doug Miller is natty. You know, but the thing is, when you look at Doug Miller's career, he took a 4-year layoff, and prior to his latest round of competition wins, people figured, okay, well, he's natty. So his latest round of competition wins, he actually improved significantly from his previous round. People like, oh, okay, he's not natty anymore. Well, during that 4-year layoff, he gained 7 pounds. Okay, and that was enough for people to say, oh, okay, he's finally not natty. I think that's kind of ridiculous. If you look at Doug Miller's history, the guy has been a freaking genetic pit bull his whole life, man. Mm-hmm. He probably came out of the womb just, you know, like looking like that. And it's pretty, I think that there's another side of the coin where people will just absolutely deny the possibility that some of these guys like Doug Miller, who show up on stage 5'9", 195, could not possibly be natty. You know, I think that's...
How big is Doug?
Doug is contest weight 195, height 5'9", maybe 5'10", maybe. Okay, and I am pretty damn sure.
He's got some crazy structure though in muscle bellies, doesn't he?
Dude, it's ridiculous. He can his arms are like about 20, 21-ish or so in the off season. And he's just got he's got crazy shape. But bottom line, man, I think that if he went on the sauce, he'd be 250 solid. That's my hypothesis.
I'm not saying I know the ins and outs of any of these individuals, but there's 3 examples that I will call up, and Paul and I have talked about these. There's Jose Raymond, there's Kai Green, and there's Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah.
And Jose earned his pro card as a welterweight, I think as a middleweight, like 5 times in the USA's and the Team Universe, various things. So he's like I don't know if he's even a middleweight. Maybe he was like about 160, 170, something like that, competing and getting his pro card. Kai Green and I think Ronnie was like in the 220s, and Kai was about
Kai and Ronnie were both right around the 215 to 219 range.
Yeah, I think something like that. I think Ronnie was a heavyweight, so 220, less than 220.
Yeah,
maybe it was 227. And those guys both went up into like the 280s or 296. So we're talking 50 pounds of muscle between being a pro card qualifier and then peak. And then, of course, Jose was, you know, barely scraping in under the 212 range. So we're talking 50 pounds of muscle. 50 versus 7 for Doug Miller.
Right.
I don't know. Like,
right.
If Doug and Doug, I've seen there's videos of him pulling 405 for 30 off the floor.
Yeah, dude's
I don't care.
Man.
Like, that just takes heart. There's actually a video of him training with Jose, training back, and he's a fucking machine. He pushes, and he's obviously got the genetics to do that and get away with it. But I don't, you know, at 5'9" and 1, like that's a light heavy. He still would be competing.
I said for the majority of guys, totally natural, who actually really learn how to train really hard, learn how to really work their diet. A guy that's 5'9" or 5'10" should be able to get to 195 relatively lean. That at that height, that weight. And I'm talking about in single digits. If he spends 10 years, 15 years really learning how to train hard and really training hard, really working his nutrition well, taking advantage of all the things he has available to him, then pretty much the majority of guys should be able to get into the mid to high 190 range at that 5'9", 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", and be in single digits in the mid to high 190s.
There's Alan, you've probably seen this bantered back and forth. The fat-free mass index. Yeah. What's the cutoff? Like 24. Yeah.
Curry and colleagues. Yeah, it's 25. Being the cutoff point beyond which it's questionable whether the person is natty or not. But with the Curry study, half of the subjects on there were self-reported body composition. It wasn't objectively measured. And there's so many issues and problems with that. And, that's one of the things that really bugs me is when people point to the Curry study as this bottom line thing, fat-free mass index 25. Oh, that person's greater, so they're on. That's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard.
Isn't the Casey Butt scale similar to that, or is it the same thing?
It's similar, but Casey, he specifies outliers and how far they can get, like into the 25, 26, so an occasional 27, and just based on people's just individual differences and stuff. And I think that is highly counterproductive to base your whole goal-setting system on a number, on a cutoff,
right.
A supposed cutoff number of
so
one observation.
You're creating a built-in delimiter, right?
Yeah,
like I can only be so big based on a study I read. Like, how do you go forward with that mindset?
Mm-hmm.
You can't. You just spend your time on the natty witch hunt, and you're pissed off. And look, these guys, God bless them, they have shit genetics, and maybe some of them have hopped on and didn't even look that great, and it's a lot of these guys who won't necessarily accept the fact that they've been dealt a really poor genetic hand, while others have been dealt a lot of gifts. So it's the injustice of biology. What can you say?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about someone who's a friend of mine who I've worked with, who I used to do a podcast with, Jordan Peters, and he's completely open with everything he uses. The amounts are pretty friggin' high. It's all on his discussion board. He's never just lets it all out there, and people will say, they'll just say he's all drugs. But when I was working with Jordan,
that dude trains his ass off.
He trains his ass off, and I was even going to say that he trains his ass off. But when it comes to eating, we had him at 10,000 calories a day.
That's Perillo. That's Perillo level.
Yeah. I mean,
not even using the MCT oil.
Yeah, and or any other nasty shit that he sells. I've nothing against John, but some of that stuff tastes awful. I've ordered all those bars and stuff; they're bad. But some of the stuff is pretty good too. Anyway, but like literally, Jordan. I mean, we're talking like a panic from the thought of the next meal coming in. We're talking all out. Like do or die mindset, meal by meal, workout by workout, rep by rep, all fucking in on everything.
Drugs and how many guys, it doesn't matter, drugs or natural, approach their goals, their physique goals with that mentality? How many? For real, like how many?
Very, very, very few. There's something, I mean, gosh, I hate to, and I'm not saying people should use drugs or it will change your mindset, but like there's a devil may care attitude that comes with, fuck it, I'm going for it. Load that syringe, load that bar, load the plate, I'm taking it all on. Right. I can give a rat's ass. And those things, like you don't see too many people, although there are like Doug Miller is an example. Like that guy's a fucking animal. He trains so hard. Right. But I totally can believe that he is.
And I think if you want to get back to any one common denominator, that's what you're going to find, natural or enhanced. The natural guys who are really developed, what I have consistently found, they don't give a shit about whether or not somebody else is using. What they care about is the focus on what they're getting accomplished. And that's kind of why when I wrote that rant and then people came back at me and said I was whining, I'm like, I'm not whining. I'm telling you guys, shut the fuck up about talking about who's natural, who's enhanced. Focus on what you can meet, what you can basically, how far you can take your training, how far you can push yourself, how much food you can eat over the next few months, or how hard you can diet. In other words, find those places where you can get really uncomfortable for an extended period of time, and you're going to see some pretty incredible things happen, transformation-wise, with how you look, how you feel, and how you perform. But when you're in this constant state of living very comfortably and training very comfortably inside this box that feels good, homeostasis is really freaking strong on a lot of levels, okay? And when you decide, you're like, well, I'm going to leave 4 reps in the tank on these sets. You're not training hard, motherfucker. Like, I don't even know what that bullshit is. Like, what? I don't know what that bullshit is. Like, like 4 reps in the tank. Or 3 reps
10 reps in the tank.
You are warming up. You are fucking warming up. That is not training. Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. When you go in for the next year and decide, I'm going to take every training session to the limit that I can take it is, and then I'm going to eat as well high quality food, whole food sources, pound of protein, good carb sources, good fat sources, and do that for a year. Do it for a year. Do it for 6 months and see what happens. And that's the problem with these guys' mentality is that they sit back and they whine. Most of the time, I can't even tell when they start bitching at me online. I can't even tell they've ever picked up a weight. And they're like, I've been training for 5 years. I'm like, I can't tell you trained for 5 minutes.
Did your buddy Jordan Peters, did he feel like he was just shortchanged in the genetics department, or how far did he get?
Oh, well, he's an ABBA pro. He got that, and he's 5'6", 250 on stage.
He's massive.
He's fucking enormous.
Okay.
He's absolutely, yeah. He's
dude.
Ridiculous.
He's like incredibly freaking strong. Like if you go watch his workouts, they're insane. But that's my point. Like what he took in the syringe did not give him that, and that's what these guys don't understand. I know natural guys that train that hard too, and they look like they train that hard too. Like they're not as big. Clearly, they don't have that kind of mass. But one is like you're talking about with Doug Miller. You're talking about any of these guys. The one thing they all have in common is how hard in the paint they're willing to go in their training, how meticulous they're willing to be with their diet, and you know how exact they're willing to be with all these things. So they see the results from that. But these guys who are just recreational trainers, what they want is they want to look like that, but they don't really know the process that it takes to get to those places, and that's what separates those motherfuckers.
You know what would be really cool is if you guys could talk about these processes in a live gym setting. That would be really amazing.
That's actually what we're all going to be doing here in the next couple of months. I guess it'd be great to plug the fact that we're doing a seminar and out in Denver in August 10th and 11th.
Yep.
Right?
August 10th, 11th.
It's like you guys like frozen time, like the fucking Matrix there for a second.
I thought you were gonna flow with it.
we're gonna be covering all of these concepts as to how you can maximize all these principles, from biomechanics to nutrition, to training principles, to all this kind of stuff over those 2 days. So for the guys who want to understand like what it does take to absolutely maximize their genetic potential, whether they're natty or whether they're enhanced. We're going to be covering that pretty significantly over those 2 days in Denver. So
at the Armburst gym. This is where Phil Heath calls his training home.
Yep.
So
exactly.
SwoleyTrinityTour.com will get you to where you can buy a ticket. Got that set up now.
Yeah.
We're going to jam those 2 days, man. We're just going to pack those 2 days. We're going to lay it all out. Everything we know, all the experience.
Yeah. Well, Alan's doing a multitude. Alan, you're doing a multitude of topics covering a ton of nutritional stuff that people are going to be able to walk away from in those 2 days. For the people who don't know, we've had so many sidebar conversations about what we want everybody to get out of the seminar. And that is to be able to walk away and say, I learned so much from those 2 days that I can implement now. And like we've had a multitude of discussions about this everything we're going to give people, they're going to be able to walk away and it's going to be applicable to their training, to their nutrition, to their lifestyle immediately. And that's something that we've stressed with one another that we want to be able to give people over those 2 days. So, Alan, you're going to be going over some awesome nutritional info. Scott, you're going to be going over a multitude of principles about how to design, implement, plan training, so that way you can grow, how to create that stimulus that's needed for that adaptation so you can grow. I'm going to be doing biomechanics stuff in the gym with people. I'm going to be going over how to similar stuff that Scott's going to be going over from a little bit different flavoring as to how to set up routines and programming to maximize your recovery in terms of what you need. And there's just so many things that we are going to cover. But like I said, we're going to give it in a format that everybody can walk away with after 2 days and go, I have so much I can implement right now to make me better. So I'm looking forward to it. I know you guys are excited. We're going to make it 2 pretty awesome, incredible days and pour everything we got into it. So I'm excited about getting out there with my 2 broskies for this. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, I'm just talking to the audience now. I'm a fan of these 2 guys. I'm a fan of L. Paul Carter and Dr. Scott Koresh. I am a freaking huge fan. You know, if you guys are fans of my material, dude, I like bow to these guys, man. And so, like, all of us are slightly over 40, slightly north of 40. So I think all of us are going to bring a collective, like, freaking 100 years of experience into this thing.
That's true, right?
It's not going to be a 2-day, biohacking thing where you pay $2,000 to biohack your own ignorance into another level of ignorance. This is going to be some real world shit. I mean, dude, we're going to lay it all out there. We're going to leave it all in the ring.
I didn't even think about that. It's pretty true. It's like 100 years of experience going in those 2 days, right?
Yeah, it is.
I've been training for 37 years, 38 years now.
I have 30.
I will say this with no reservations. What we're going to put out in those 2 days on August 10th and 11th is going to be like double and triple that most people would learn in the highest level certifications. Period, man.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, wow, you're really setting the bar high. I feel fucking pressured now.
Right. When you leave there, if you're natural, everyone's going to think you're enhanced.
Shit by the time that you.
Oh yeah, that's right. You come natty, you leave enhanced, basically.
Yeah, you're gonna, like, people are going to be asking you, what kind of drugs are you taking if you haven't been taking them? They're like,
we'll create some of those T-shirts that say, "No, I'm not on steroids, but thanks for asking."
I'm on the Swollen Trinity, baby. That's what I'm on.
That's right.
All right, let's. I know we're pushed up against the time limit now. I want to say thank you guys for another episode today. And like I said, we're all looking forward to getting together and teaching in a couple of months. We'll be back in 2 weeks for some more potentially controversial topics for the Swollen Trinity podcast. But I think that's our wrap for the day.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, and
listen, everyone.
I'm out. I'm sure I'll be talking to you guys within the next hour or so.
Yeah. When you get bombarded.
All right.
You're insensitive.
Until 2 weeks from now, I'm Paul Carter.
Alan Aragon.
Dr. Scott Koresh.
Dr. Scott Koresh.
Dr. Scott Koresh.
God, that is so
Scott
inside.
Stevenson.
You know, people are not even old enough to remember the Branch Davidians, but, you know.
Alan likes cults. He wants to fashion us all into cult leaders in some way.
That's why it's the people who pick up. I'm L. Paul Carter because of L. Ron Hubbard and Dr. Scott Koresh. Alan said he's trying to make us into cult leaders. So there you go. All right, that's it for this week's episode, guys. Look forward to doing it again in a couple of weeks.
Adios.
Later.